It was just a story. Right, that's what I told myself as I sat around the campfire, listening to the eerie tales my friends were sharing about the cursed graveyard in Ohio. I tried to brush it off, thinking that the whole thing was just an urban legend, something that was meant to send a chill down your spine around the fire on a dark night. But deep down, there was a small part of me that wondered if it could be true. The graveyard was located far outside of town, in a part of Ohio that seemed forgotten by time. No one really talked about it much, and if they did, it was only in hushed whispers, as though even the mention of its name could awaken something. The locals had long ago avoided the area, and the few brave souls who ventured near the place came back with tales of strange happenings. Strange, unexplainable things that made people believe the land was cursed. According to what I was hearing, the curse wasn't some typical folklore. This wasn't a haunted house or a spooky mansion with creaky floors. No, this graveyard was different. People who went there didn't just come back with stories. They came back changed. Some would return with a look of horror in their eyes. It was hard to believe at first. I mean, come on. We've all heard stories like this, right? The kind of tales that get passed down from generation to generation, usually to scare the kids or entertain guests. But the more I heard, the more my curiosity began to grow. People said that when you went near the graveyard, you could hear things. Whispers on the wind. Soft voices calling you closer. Almost like the ground itself was alive and beckoning you in. Those who listened to the whispers were said to disappear, either trapped forever in the graveyard or lost in a way no one could explain. And the worst part, the ones who didn't disappear were just as bad off. They were never quite the same again, haunted by what they'd seen or heard. The curse wasn't about death. It was about losing yourself, losing your mind to something beyond comprehension. That's when Jack brought it up, laughing as if it were some sort of joke. Jack was always the type of guy who pushed boundaries, the one who would dare someone to do something just to see if they'd go through with it. "You wouldn't dare," he said with a smirk. "I bet you won't even step foot in the graveyard." His voice was teasing, but there was something else in it too. A hint of challenge, a hint of dare. The rest of the group, a mix of friends and acquaintances, joined in, egging me on, laughing like this was all just one big joke. But I could see it in their eyes. They didn't really believe in the curse, of course. But they were all secretly hoping someone would go and prove the story wrong. It's one thing to hear about creepy places from others, but another to actually step into the unknown yourself. I could sense that they wanted someone to confirm whether the stories were just stories, or if there was something real, something terrifying, hiding in the dark corners of Ohio. They were daring me, no one else. Jack laughed louder. What? Are you scared? I felt the heat rise in my face, the blood rushing to my cheeks. Scared? Me? Of course not. I could take it. It was just a graveyard, for crying out loud. No big deal. It was probably just some old cemetery where they buried people 100 years ago. What could be so scary about that? Still, I wasn't entirely sure what made me agree, but I found myself standing up, brushing the dirt off my jeans and nodding. Fine, I said, trying to sound confident. I'll go. The group erupted in laughter and cheers, as if I'd just won some sort of twisted prize. They passed around a bottle of beer, raising their cups to me, to my courage or stupidity. Who could tell? Jack slapped me on the back, harder than I expected. All right, man. I'll be right behind you. We'll go together. Show everyone it's just a bunch of nonsense. But even as the words left his mouth, something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. Jack had a way of making you feel like you had to do things, but I knew he wasn't exactly the bravest guy in the group. His tough exterior was always just a mask. If the stories were true, I wasn't sure I wanted him there, especially not if I ended up needing help. No, I'd rather go alone. I had to prove it to myself. It didn't take long before we were in the car. Jack at the wheel, the others in the back seat, still joking and laughing. The road to the graveyard wasn't easy to find. Not many people drove that way anymore. It was old, poorly lit, and winding through a stretch of woods that seemed to swallow up the daylight. Even in the early evening hours, the atmosphere began to feel thick, suffocating, as though the very land around us was pressing down, keeping us trapped in its grip. But I told myself to shake it off. I wasn't afraid. This was all just a story. When we finally arrived, the graveyard was everything the stories promised, and more. The trees surrounding the area were tall, almost unnaturally so, their branches twisted into strange shapes that seemed to claw at the sky. The path leading into the graveyard was overgrown with weeds, and the air felt damp, like it had been holding its breath for years. The tombstones were old, some cracked and leaning at impossible angles, their inscriptions worn away by time. But there were newer graves too. Fresh flowers sat at the foot of some, and the scent of the earth was thick, clinging to everything around us. We parked the car by the side of the road, and Jack and I got out, the others staying behind, too nervous to follow. As I approached the gate, I could hear nothing but the soft rustling of leaves, almost like whispers carried by the wind. It wasn't a normal sound, though. It was subtle, like a voice. I stopped just at the entrance, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was the stories I'd heard. But something in my gut told me I should leave. I should turn around, forget this whole thing, and go back to the campfire, laughing at how I almost let myself believe the ridiculous story. But I didn't turn around. Instead, I stepped forward, drawn in by something I couldn't explain. Jack was still behind me, a few steps back, his footsteps crunching against the gravel. "Come on, let's just get this over with," he called out, trying to sound brave, but even I could hear the tremor in his voice. I took another step, and then another. Something was wrong. Something about this place felt wrong, in a way I couldn't explain. The silence around me grew heavy, oppressive, as though the graveyard itself was holding its breath, waiting. Then I heard it, the whisper. It was so faint, so quiet that I almost missed it. But it was there, carried on the wind, just loud enough for me to hear. "Come closer." The voice wasn't friendly, and it certainly wasn't a voice I recognized. My heart skipped a beat as I froze in place. The whisper seemed to wrap itself around me, tugging at my mind, pulling me toward the deeper parts of the graveyard. I glanced over my shoulder, but Jack was still there, looking hesitant. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked uneasy, shifting on his feet. "We should leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. Something was calling me forward. I didn't believe in curses, at least not until that night. Sure, I had heard the stories, but stories were just that. Stories. They weren't real. That's what I kept telling myself as I sat in the passenger seat of Jack's car, the dim lights from the dashboard barely cutting through the darkness of the road. We had driven out to the outskirts of town, the road winding and narrow, the trees closing in on both sides as if trying to swallow us whole. Jack's headlights barely lit up the path ahead, and every now and then we'd pass a small, dilapidated sign that seemed to warn us to turn back. But we didn't. Jack had kept up the bravado, acting like this was just another adventure, another dare that we could laugh about later. "You scared?" he teased, glancing over at me. His grin was wide, but there was something in his eyes, a nervous energy that he didn't try to hide. I shook my head, pretending to be unfazed. "No way. It's just a graveyard, Jack. What's the worst that could happen?" But even as I said it, something inside me felt off. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to loom over the car, or the eerie stillness that hung in the air, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was waiting for us. Still, I shrugged it off. I was determined to see it through. After all, what kind of man would I be if I let a silly legend stop me? We drove for what felt like ages, the landscape around us growing darker and more desolate. Eventually, Jack slowed down and turned the car off the main road, down a smaller, even more overgrown path. We were heading into a field now, the grass brushing against the sides of the car. There was no sign of life here. No other cars, no animals, not even the hum of the wind. It was as if the entire world had forgotten this place existed. The cemetery appeared in the distance, its silhouette breaking through the night like a jagged tooth. The old iron gate was rusted and barely hanging on, the hinges creaking as it swayed in the breeze. The gravestones that lined the entrance were tilted at odd angles, some of them half buried in the earth, their inscriptions long worn away by time and neglect. The place looked abandoned, forgotten by the world, a perfect setting for a ghost story, if you ask me. I could feel the unease growing in my chest as Jack parked the car at the edge of the road, the headlights casting long shadows over the uneven ground. I stepped out first, my boots crunching on the gravel beneath me. The air smelled stale, like damp earth, and the cold seemed to cut through me immediately. Jack hesitated for a moment, staring at the cemetery. "Maybe we should turn around," he said, his voice quieter now, less confident than it had. I glanced at him, almost surprised by his sudden uncertainty. "What? You're scared?" I teased, but even I could hear the nervousness in my own voice. Jack didn't answer. He just stood there, looking at the cemetery, his face pale under the dim light. He seemed unsure, torn between the urge to leave and the challenge of proving the stories wrong. "Let's just take a quick look," I said, more to myself than to him. "I'm not scared of some old graveyard." I began walking toward the gate, a feeling of dread growing heavier with each step. Jack didn't follow right away, but after a moment, I heard his footsteps behind me. The gravel crunched under our feet, loud in the otherwise oppressive silence. As we reached the iron gate, I could see that it was almost completely overgrown with vines, the black bars barely visible beneath the thick layers of moss and ivy. A sign, barely legible, was nailed to the gate, warning against trespassing. But of course, we ignored it. I pushed the gate open, the metal groaning as it swung on its rusted hinges. The sound echoed in the stillness, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Jack let out a small laugh, but it sounded forced, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. "This place is definitely creepy," he muttered. We stepped inside, the ground uneven beneath our feet. The cemetery stretched out before us, a mix of old and new graves, some barely marked with stones, others with elaborate tombs that looked too grand for a small cemetery like this. The further we walked, the more the sense of isolation and unease pressed in around us. The trees, too, seemed to lean in closer, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes. There was no breeze, no sound of animals or insects, just silence, thick and suffocating. It was as though the land itself. I started walking deeper into the cemetery, my curiosity driving me forward. Jack stayed behind for a moment, his eyes scanning the area. as if he expected something to jump out at him. I stopped in front of one of the older tombstones, its inscription so worn away that I couldn't read it. Moss and vines had overtaken it, and the stone was cracked in several places. The grave was almost completely sunken into the ground. I reached down to touch it, and that's when I heard it. A whisper, soft at first, barely a sound over the rustling of the leaves. It was distant, muffled, but clear enough to make me freeze. I turned around, half expecting to see Jack standing right behind me, but he wasn't. I couldn't see him anywhere. Panic surged through me, but I tried to calm myself. Maybe he had just wandered off a little. I called out for Jack, my voice loud in the silence, but there was no response. The whispering continued, growing louder, but I couldn't make out the words. It was as if the wind was trying to speak to me, urging me to listen, to follow. I took a few cautious steps forward, my eyes scanning the rows of gravestones, trying to find Jack. That's when I saw it. A new grave. The dirt was freshly disturbed, the mound of earth still soft and dark. The gravestone was small and simple, nothing like the grander tombs nearby. But what caught my attention was the smell. It was strange, sweet, almost sickly, like fresh earth mixed with something unnatural. The scent was so strong that it made me gag, but I couldn't look away from the grave. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the edge of the grave, I felt a sudden chill. It wasn't just the air. It felt like something cold had wrapped itself around me, tightening, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I looked down at the grave, and that's when I saw it. The name on the stone, Margaret Lawson. I didn't know why, but seeing that name made the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just the name itself, but the way it seemed to stare back at me, as if it was waiting for me to understand something. Something I couldn't quite grasp. The whispering grew louder now, not coming from the wind anymore, but from everywhere around me. I felt it. Whatever was in this place, whatever cursed the land, was drawing me in. The earth beneath my feet seemed to shift, like it was alive, and suddenly, I realized that I wasn't alone. I spun around, calling Jack's name again, but this time the words stuck in my throat. Jack wasn't behind me anymore. He had disappeared. When I turned back to head toward the car, I immediately felt a rush of panic sweep over me. The path I had taken to enter the cemetery had completely disappeared. It wasn't just that the road had faded out of sight. It was as though it had never existed in the first place. The ground beneath my feet had shifted, and now the trees that had been lining the road were nowhere to be found. It was as if the world itself had swallowed the path, leaving me stranded in the middle of this cursed place, with no way out. I stood frozen for a moment, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The air had grown unnervingly still. the kind of stillness that made every sound feel magnified, like the world was holding its breath. The tombstones that had once seemed so distant now appeared to be much closer, their jagged edges sharper in the dim moonlight. But something was wrong. The tombstones, they were moving, not in a literal, physical sense, but the way they shifted in my mind's eye. I blinked, and for a split second, one of the gravestones seemed to tilt toward me, its shadow elongating in a way that defied logic. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing. I called out for Jack, my voice trembling, but my words were swallowed by the oppressive silence of the graveyard. No response. No sound. It was as if I were the only living being in the entire place. Panic gripped me, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Where was Jack? Hadn't he been right behind me? I turned around in a frantic circle, hoping to see the faint glow of the car's headlights in the distance. But there was nothing, just the vast emptiness of the graveyard. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the mind. Maybe the trees and tombstones were playing tricks on me in the darkness. Maybe I had wandered deeper than I realized. But then, the whispers started. "Get out," the voice hissed, its breath icy against the back of my neck. "Leave now, before you're next." I froze. My blood ran cold at the sound of the voice. It wasn't Jack. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was something far older and far darker. Something that had been here long before I ever arrived. The voice seemed to come from the very earth beneath me, as if the land itself was speaking, warning me of the fate that awaited anyone who dared to stay. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I had to remain calm, that there had to be a logical explanation. I needed to find Jack, get to the car, and leave. But when I took a step forward, the ground beneath me felt wrong. It wasn't just uneven. It felt as though the earth was shifting, pulling me deeper into the graveyard. My legs felt heavy, like the very soil was dragging me down, unwilling to let me leave. Every step was an effort, and with each movement, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I felt the air grow colder, as though the temperature had dropped by degrees with every passing second. "Leave now." I stumbled again, but this time I couldn't regain my footing. The ground beneath me seemed to give way, and I collapsed to my knees in front of a gravestone. My palms scraped against the rough stone as I tried to steady myself, but there was no strength in my arms. I looked up, my eyes landing on the name etched into the stone. Margaret Lawson. The name was unfamiliar to me, and yet there was something unsettling about it. Something that made my stomach turn. I didn't know who Margaret Lawson was, but the way the name stared back at me, it felt like a message, a warning, or maybe a reminder that I was in far more danger than I had realized. My fingers traced the letters of the name as my heart pounded in my chest. And that's when it happened. The ground beneath me shifted violently, as though the earth itself had grown impatient with my presence. The dirt began to tremble, the gravestones around me rattling, as if they were being pulled by some invisible force. The earth groaned, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from the very core of the world. Then, with a suddenness that took my breath away, the ground split open. A crack appeared in the earth, jagged and wide, like the mouth of a giant, eager to swallow me whole. From the darkness of the crack, a cold, icy wind shot up, biting through my clothes like 1,000 needles. The air turned to ice, the chill so intense that it burned. I gasped for air, but it felt like I was suffocating. The wind howled, growing louder, its shrill wail echoing through the graveyard. I tried to scramble away from the crack, but the ground seemed to hold me in place, as if it had rooted me there, keeping me from escaping. The whispers were now deafening, a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, their words unintelligible, but filled with a sense of desperation. Leave now, before it's too late. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The voices were closing in, and the air grew thick with an unnatural presence. It felt as if something ancient was rising from the earth itself, something that had been buried here for centuries, waiting for the right moment to awaken. I tried to scream, but the words died in my throat. The cold was too much, the darkness too overwhelming. It felt like the very soul of the graveyard was closing in around me. Then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, everything went dark. I don't know what happened next. One moment, I was kneeling on the ground, staring at the gaping crack in the earth. And the next, there was nothing. No cold, no whispers, no movement. Just a vast, empty blackness. It wasn't like passing out. It was like everything had ceased to exist. Like I had fallen into a void where nothing mattered, where time and space had no meaning. I don't know how long I was there. Seconds, minutes, hours. It felt like an eternity. When I finally opened my eyes again, I was back in the graveyard, the crack in the earth gone, the wind silenced, and the whispers faded into nothing. The tombstones stood still, their jagged shapes frozen in place. It was as though nothing had happened. But I knew something had. I knew that I hadn't imagined it, that I hadn't just fallen asleep or dreamed the whole thing. The curse of the graveyard was real, and whatever it was that haunted this place, it had taken hold of me. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady, my mind still reeling from what I had just experienced. Jack was still nowhere to be found. It was as if he had disappeared entirely. The graveyard was quiet now. Too quiet, and I could feel my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. "Jack?" I called out weakly, but my voice seemed to vanish into the air. No response. I had to get out of here. I had to find a way to escape before whatever force had taken hold of this place took me as well. But when I turned to leave, I realized the path was still gone. The way out was no longer there. When I woke up, I was no longer in the graveyard I had known. The air was still cold, but the oppressive silence that had previously surrounded me was now even more suffocating. As I opened my eyes, the world before me had changed completely. The trees that had once lined the edges of the cemetery, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky, were gone. In their place stood more gravestones. Hundreds. No, thousands of them. The gravestones stretched endlessly in every direction, as far as my eyes could see. Each one marked with a name, each one representing a life claimed by the curse of this cursed place. The ground beneath me was soft, like I was walking through a field of thick, damp soil that had been untouched for centuries. It was impossible to know how long I had been unconscious. Had it been minutes? Hours? Days? All I knew was that something had changed. Something was different. And the air felt heavier, darker, almost suffocating. I could feel it in my chest. The weight of all the souls that had been claimed by this cursed land. It was as if they were watching me, waiting for me to move. Watching me with 100 invisible eyes. I could feel their eyes upon me, their restless energy moving in the air, as if every gravestone was a silent sentinel that had been left behind to guard this cursed place. As I stumbled through the endless sea of graves, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I glanced around nervously, the shadows of the gravestones stretching out before me like dark fingers, reaching for my soul. The cold air wrapped itself around me, squeezing the life out of my every breath. I could hear nothing but the faint rustling of the leaves beneath my feet. The graveyard was unnervingly silent, yet the silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. Then, just as I was beginning to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, I saw it. At first, it was just a figure standing motionless behind one of the gravestones. I wasn't sure if it was real or if it was just another trick my mind was playing on me. But as I moved closer, I could see her clearly. She was a woman. Her skin was pale, so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light. Her eyes were dark, pitch black, like the depths of a void. There was something about her that made me freeze in place. She didn't move, not even an inch. She just stood there, staring at me with a look that was both empty and full of something I couldn't comprehend. Her presence was overpowering. It was as if she was part of the very earth beneath me, as if she had always been there, waiting for me to come. And then she spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but the words carried with them an undeniable weight. You're the 100th. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to breathe. The words echoed in my mind like a drumbeat, pounding in my ears, louder with each repetition. The 100th. The weight of what she said hit me like a brick, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I was the 100th. The 100th soul to be taken by this cursed place. But why me? What made me special? Why had I been chosen? I felt the panic rise in my chest, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would burst. My breath became shallow and erratic as the reality of what she had said began to settle in. I had known deep down that something was terribly wrong about this place. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing her say that I was the 100th, made everything feel so much worse. The other souls, the other 100, were they like me? Were they... I tried to move, to take a step back, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was as though the earth had rooted me to the spot, holding me in place with an invisible force. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that I wasn't just being watched. I was being judged. This was no accident, no random occurrence. I was part of something far bigger, far older than I could ever comprehend. The woman didn't move. She just stood there, her black eyes locked onto mine, as though she were waiting for me to understand. Her presence was like a weight, pressing down on me, smothering me in its cold, unsealing grip. The longer I stood there, the more I felt the crushing reality of my situation. I wasn't going to get out. I wasn't going to escape. I had crossed a line when I stepped into this graveyard. The curse had already marked me, and now there was no going back. I took a hesitant step forward, trying to break free from the hold this place had on me, but it felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. The gravestones around me seemed to close in, their names and dates mocking me as I passed, their whispers filling the air, growing louder and more frantic. Each grave was a testament to someone who had once walked this earth, someone who had come before me and been swallowed by the curse. I felt their presence all around me, their energy, their longing, their pain. The woman's voice cut through the air again, low and haunting, like a death rattle in the wind. You're the 100th. You will join us. You will never leave. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I could feel my heart sinking into my stomach. What had I done? What had I gotten myself into? This wasn't just some ghost story. This was real. The curse was real. The 100 souls that had been taken before me weren't just stories. They were trapped here, bound to this place, just like I was now. I had become part of it. I was the 100th, the next victim of the Ohio curse, and there was no way out. I tried to fight it, to push against the overwhelming fear that threatened to swallow me whole. But the more I fought, the more I felt myself sinking, as if the earth itself was trying to drag me down into the darkness with the rest of them. The other souls, the 100 souls before me, were waiting. They were here, in this place, trapped. I tried to scream, but the sound got caught in my throat, strangled by the weight of the curse that clung to me. The woman didn't move, but her eyes, her dark, endless eyes, followed me as I took another step, my body trembling with fear. I was no longer in control. The curse had taken over, and I was nothing more than another name on the gravestones that surrounded me. As I looked around, I realized that the graveyard was no longer just a place of death. It was a prison for the 100 souls who had come before me and would come after me. A prison where no one could ever truly escape, not physically, not mentally, not spiritually. This was my fate now. I had joined them. I had become the 100th. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me from every direction. At first, they were just faint, like distant murmurs carried on the wind. But now, they were as clear as if they were spoken right into my ear. The voices came from all around me, swirling in the thick, heavy air, pushing into my mind like 1,000 hands pressing against my chest. I could feel the weight of them, suffocating me, stealing the very breath from my lungs. My heart pounded harder with every breath, each inhale feeling tighter, more labored than the last. It was hard to focus on anything except the whispers. They seemed to twist and turn, muttering words I couldn't understand but could feel deep in my bones. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as the pressure of the voices pressed in on me, each one carrying with it the feeling of something dark, something malevolent crawling beneath my skin. It felt as though they were inside me, these voices, not just whispering, but trying to take over, to turn me into one of them. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to block out the sounds, but it didn't help. The whispers only grew louder, more insistent. I stumbled forward, my legs shaky and unsteady, my mind racing with fear. I had always been a skeptic, someone who dismissed stories like this as superstition. But now, standing in this cursed graveyard, I realized the truth. The curse wasn't just a story. It was real. Every tale I had heard about the place, the whispers, the disappearances, the restless spirits, had been true. I had stepped into something far beyond my understanding. The 100 souls weren't just lost, they were trapped. their spirits bound to this place for eternity. I could feel it now, the weight of their presence all around me. Each one had been claimed by the curse, each one a warning for the next. And now I was part of it. I had crossed the line. I had stepped into their world, and there was no way out. My heart thudded in my chest as the realization sank in. I had walked into this graveyard with the belief that I could leave whenever I wanted, that I could prove the stories wrong. But the truth was more terrifying than I could have imagined. This place wasn't just a graveyard. It was a prison, and I had just been locked inside.
Suddenly, the air around me grew colder. The oppressive weight of the whispers grew heavier, as though the very ground beneath me was reaching up, trying to pull me deeper into the earth. I tried to move, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, like the soil itself was holding me in place. My breath came faster now, short and shallow, as panic began to rise in my chest. I couldn't escape. The more I struggled, the more the unseen force around me seemed to tighten its grip. That's when I felt it, a cold, ice-cold touch on my shoulder. At first, it was just a sensation, something I couldn't quite place, but then it grew stronger, colder, like a hand had placed itself there. I froze, my heart skipping a beat as the chill seeped through my clothes, sending a shiver down my spine. It was the kind of cold that didn't belong in the world of the living, the kind that came from something not of this earth. I turned quickly, spinning around, desperate to see who was behind me, but there was no one there. The graveyard was empty. The tombstones loomed in the distance, their shapes twisted and distorted in the dim light, but there was no one else around. No figures, no shadows, no sign of movement, just the weight of the silence, broken only by the distant whispers that seemed to grow louder with each passing second. I blinked, trying to clear the panic from my mind, but the feeling didn't go away. The cold hand on my shoulder remained, its presence growing stronger. It was as though someone or something was there, standing just behind me, but when I looked, there was no one. I could feel the pressure building, a force that wasn't my own, pressing me forward, pulling me toward the gravestones. It was as if the ground itself was alive, alive with a hunger that reached out to claim me. I couldn't move. The invisible hand was still there, pushing me forward, but I couldn't take a step. My legs wouldn't cooperate, my body refusing to obey. It was as if I were being held in place by some unseen force, bound to this cursed ground, unable to break free. I tried to scream, to call out for help, but my voice was swallowed by the eerie silence of the graveyard. The whispers had grown deafening now, filling my ears with their unintelligible words, their demands, their promises. I wanted to cover my ears, to block them out, but it was impossible. The sound was inside my head, filling my thoughts, twisting my mind. A cold hand continued to press against my shoulder, unyielding, unrelenting. I could feel the chills seep through my skin, straight into my bones. It wasn't just cold, it was ancient, a cold that had been buried in this place for centuries, a cold that had consumed every soul that had wandered into this cursed graveyard. It was the kind of cold that froze not just your body, but your very soul, stealing away your warmth, your life, your will to fight. The force behind me began to grow stronger, pulling me, dragging me toward the tombstones, as if they were calling to me, waiting for me to join the ranks of the souls that had come before. I could see them now, the gravestones, their names carved into the stone, their dates of death faded and worn by time. But each one represented a life, a person who had once been here, someone who had been claimed by this place, swallowed whole by the curse. I wanted to scream again, to run, to do anything to break free from the invisible grip that held me. But I couldn't. The more I tried to move, the more the force pushed against me, like a giant hand wrapping around my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. My heart raced, but my body remained frozen in place, unable to escape. Then I felt it, something warm, something alive. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted again. But this time, it wasn't just the earth that moved. It was something else, something deeper, something ancient. The whispers stopped, suddenly silenced, as though a great presence had come to stand over me. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the voices of the lost souls. It was something far worse, something that didn't belong in this world, something that had been waiting. I looked around frantically, desperate to understand what was happening, but it was too late. The hand on my shoulder tightened, the cold seeping deeper into my skin. It was no longer just a presence. It was a force, a power that was pulling me into the graveyard, pulling me into the earth itself. I tried to fight it, tried to scream, but my body refused to respond. I could feel my consciousness slipping away, my body growing numb as I was dragged into the depths of the curse. And then everything went black. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me was the whispers. The voices had returned, but this time they weren't just distant. They were close. They were inside my head, speaking to me, telling me that I was part of them now, telling me that I was one of the 100, that I would never leave. And as the darkness closed in around me, I knew that the curse had claimed me. I don't know how I made it out. It's still a blur in my mind, like a dream I can't quite remember. One moment, I was in the depths of that graveyard, feeling the weight of 100 souls pressing in on me, and the next, I was back at the edge of it, standing in front of the rusted iron gate, like nothing had ever happened. The graveyard was still there, silent and waiting, but somehow I had made it out. I wasn't sure if it was luck or if the curse had finally loosened its grip on me. But I wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth.
I was out, and that was all that mattered.
When I opened my eyes, the air was different. The oppressive weight of the graveyard, the chilling whispers that had haunted me, the cold hand on my shoulder, all of it was gone. The wind was still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The silence was no longer deafening, but peaceful in a strange, unsettling way. I looked around, disoriented, trying to make sense of where I was. The moonlight bathed the road, casting long shadows that stretched out in front of me. The trees, the broken tombstones, the strange atmosphere, everything had faded into the background, and I was standing alone in front of the gate, as though nothing had ever happened. But something wasn't right. The graveyard felt distant, like a memory that was slipping away. But the feeling in my chest didn't change. I was still shaken, still unsure of what I had just experienced. I looked around again, my eyes scanning the empty road, but there was no sign of Jack. No sign of anyone. Had I really been alone this whole time? Where had Jack gone? I called his name, my voice echoing into the night. But there was no answer. It was as though he had vanished completely. Had he disappeared into the graveyard like the others? Had the curse claimed him as well? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. All I could think about was getting out of that place, putting as much distance between myself and the graveyard of the lost as possible. But the thought of Jack, of his dare, of him pushing me into that cursed place, gnawed at me. I didn't know where he was, and I didn't know if he was ever coming back. And that I took a step away from the gate, my heart pounding in my chest. The chill in the air had dissipated, but the knot in my stomach remained. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that place as I could, but my legs felt heavy, as if they too were hesitant to leave. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the gate and the dark road that stretched out in front of me. The graveyard behind me was quiet, too quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. Eventually, I forced myself to turn away. My feet carried me down the road, away from the cemetery, away from whatever dark force had tried to claim me. The air was still, and the night seemed peaceful again, but I couldn't forget what had happened. I couldn't shake the image of the woman in the graveyard, her pale skin and dark eyes telling me I was the 100th. The thought of it haunted me, gnawing at my mind as I walked. I didn't know if the curse had truly let me go, or if I had only been granted a temporary reprieve. The thought that I might not be free, that I might one day return to the cemetery as part of its eternal curse, was almost too much to bear. When I finally reached the car, I didn't hesitate. I didn't even look back. I got in, slammed the door shut, and started the engine.
The headlights cut through the darkness, and the road ahead felt like a lifeline, a way to escape whatever had been waiting for me in that cursed place. I drove for what felt like hours, not stopping until I was far, far away. But even as the miles passed, I couldn't shake the sense that I hadn't truly escaped. The curse of the Ohio graveyard hadn't been broken. It was still out there, still waiting for the next soul to claim.
I didn't go back to that place, and I don't think I ever will. The memory of the graveyard, of the whispers and the cold hand, is something I try to keep buried deep within me. But I know the truth now. The graveyard isn't just a place. It's a trap. It's a prison for the souls who have been claimed, for the souls who have walked into its depths and never returned. And I know that one day it will be waiting for someone else to take the same path I did. So, if you ever find yourself near Ohio, take a different route. Don't go near that place. Don't let the stories lure you in, because once you step foot in the graveyard of the lost, there's no telling what will happen next. You might walk out like I did, but you'll never be the same. And the curse will always be waiting for the next soul to claim. I don't know what happened to Jack. I don't know if he's still out there, lost to the curse, like so many others. Maybe one day, someone will find his name etched into one of the gravestones, just like the others. Or maybe he's still wandering the graveyard, trapped in the same nightmare that I escaped. But as for me, I've learned my lesson. There are some things in this world that are better left alone, and the Ohio graveyard is one of them. I may have escaped, but I know the curse is still out there, waiting. And I'll never forget the warning it gave me. The whisper that promised, "You're next." But for now, I'm safe. For now, I'm free. And that's all that matters.